Lyra Ashveil stood at the end of the line. That was where they always put her. Not because she arrived last, because nobody wanted to stand beside the scarred Omega, and the court of King Kade Dravenmoor had very specific ideas about what beauty was supposed to look like. The presentation ceremony happened once every 5 years. Every unmated wolf in all 6 territories came to the Great Hall, stood before the king, and was assessed. Most of the women wore silk. Most of them had spent weeks preparing. They stood tall, shoulders back, eyes bright with hope, or fear, or both. Lyra wore a plain gray dress. Her hair was loose. The scars that ran from her throat down to her left shoulder were completely visible. She had not tried to cover them. She never did. The hall was enormous, with high stone walls and torches that burned gold along every column. There were hundreds of people watching from the upper galleries, wolves from all 6 territories, dressed in the colors of their packs, leaning over the railings to get a better look at the women standing below. The king sat at the far end of the hall on a raised platform. His chair was not quite a throne, but it was close enough. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that made people forget what they were about to say. He did not look bored. He looked like a man doing a job he had done many times before, and doing it efficiently. One by one, the women were called forward. One by one, he looked at them. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he asked a question. Mostly, he just looked, and the beta standing at his right shoulder wrote something down in a ledger. Then they called Lyra's name. She walked forward. The crowd in the galleries went quiet in the way crowds go quiet when something unexpected happens. Not silent, but hushed. That particular stillness of people waiting to see what comes next. She stopped at the marked line on the floor. She looked at the king. He looked at her. He looked at the scars. Then he laughed. It was a short sound. Not loud. Not even mean, exactly. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when someone sees something they consider too small for serious thought. A dismissal dressed up as a reaction. The court around him picked it up the way courts always do, like a wave moving through water. And for 3 full seconds, the great hall was filled with the sound of people laughing at Lyra Ashveil. She did not flinch. She did not look at the floor. She held the king's gaze for 1 second longer than any wolf in that room had ever held it. Then she turned and walked back to the line, not because she was told to, because she was finished. She filed the laugh away somewhere quiet inside her chest, in the place where she kept things she would need later. The beta's name was Soren, and he was smarter than his king gave him credit for. He was the one who assigned Lyra to the royal household 3 days after the ceremony. The official reason was that the archive needed sorting. 500 years of pack records, unsorted since the last royal archivist retired. Nobody wanted the work. It was dusty, silent, and entirely removed from the social world of the palace. Soren chose Lyra for it on purpose. She understood this, and did not ask him why. She simply went to the archive, lit the lamps, and began. The archive was a long underground room beneath the east wing of the palace, with shelves that ran from floor to ceiling, and scrolls and ledgers packed so tightly that pulling one out sometimes brought 3 others with it. It smelled of old paper and stone, and the particular stillness of a room that has not been properly breathed in for years. Lyra liked it immediately. She was good at silence. She was good at patience. She was good at looking at something everyone else had given up on, and finding the shape of it underneath the disorder. She worked every day from first light until the lamps needed refilling. She sorted by territory, then by year, then by subject. She found things that had been misfiled. Not by accident, she realized slowly, but by someone who had wanted them unfound. Records from before the 6 territories existed. Records from before the current pack hierarchy was established. Records that described a world organized very differently from the one she lived in now. She kept sorting. She kept reading. She did not tell anyone what she found. Kade Dravenmoor did not think about the scarred Omega after the ceremony. He had a great many things to think about. 3 of his 6 territories were reporting unusual behavior. Wolves losing their sense of pack connection, rank breaks happening without cause, bonded pairs suddenly unable to feel each other the way bonded pairs were supposed to feel. It was like watching a cloth come apart 1 thread at a time, and nobody could tell him why. He spent his days in council meetings, and his evenings reviewing reports, and his nights not sleeping particularly well. Then one afternoon he walked through the East Wing for no specific reason, or so he told himself, and he passed the Omega in the corridor outside the archive. She was carrying a stack of ledgers almost as tall as her head. She could not see where she was going. He stopped to let her pass. She did not notice him, took 2 more steps, then stopped herself when she realized something large was in her path. She looked around the ledgers at him. He said something cutting. He did it automatically, the way some people say good morning, not because they mean it, but because their mouth had been trained to do it. She looked at him for 1 second, then she adjusted the ledgers in her arms and walked around him without a word. He stood in the corridor and watched her go. He had said sharp things to dozens of people in this palace. They apologized, they looked away, they shrank. She had looked at him as though she was deciding something, and then made the decision, and moved on. He did not sleep well that night either. He started finding reasons to walk through the East Wing. What Lyra knew about her scars, she had known since she was 12 years old. Her mother had told her, the night before she left. She had sat across from Lyra at the kitchen table in their small house at the edge of the Packlands, and she had explained in a very quiet voice what the ritual scars were for. They were not from a wound. They were not from a fight. They were a binding. Her mother had been afraid, not of Lyra, but of what Lyra carried, and she had done what frightened people do. She had tried to make it smaller. She had pressed the thing down beneath skin and bone and scar tissue, and she had told herself she was protecting her daughter. She had been protecting everyone else. Lyra had lived with this for 17 years. She had never shifted. Every wolf in every territory assumed this meant she could not, that the scars had taken something from her, that she was, in the most literal sense, incomplete. They were wrong about what the scars had taken. They were wrong about what incomplete meant. The creature came in the dark of the new moon, in the 3rd month of Lyra's time in the palace. She was walking back from the archive later than usual, because she had found something in the sealed records that she needed to read to the end. She was halfway up the lower corridor when she heard it behind her. Not footsteps exactly. Something heavier than footsteps. Something older. She walked faster. Then she ran. It followed. She turned a corner and pressed herself against the wall, and it came around after her, and she saw it clearly for the first time. Something from the border territories. Something that should not have existed inside a controlled packland. Something that the old texts called a void-touched shadow beast, and which she had read about only 2 weeks ago, in a record that was supposed to be misfiled. She was afraid. And then something happened. The thing in her that had been bound for 17 years felt the creature the way a locked room feels a key. Her scars heated. Her hands changed without her telling them to. Not the shift. Wolves shifted into animal form, and that was not what this was. This was something else. Something that moved through her from the soles of her feet to the crown of her head. Something that said, "I know what you are, and you have no power here." The creature stopped. It looked at her. It retreated. Lyra stood alone in the dark corridor, breathing as though she had been running for miles, looking at her own hands, which did not belong to a powerless Omega from the edge of Packlands. They belonged to something older than that. Something the 6 territories had forgotten existed. "I have been waiting," said a voice behind her, "for about 40 years." Lyra turned. The old woman standing in the corridor had silver hair and eyes the color of winter bark, and a stillness about her that was nothing like peace. It was the stillness of deep water. Her name was Elder Marin. Lyra had seen her once at the edge of a council gathering, though no one had introduced her or explained who she was. She held out a small iron key. "Your mother thought she was protecting you," Elder Marin said. "She was protecting everyone else." She placed the key in Lyra's palm and walked away down the corridor, and did not look back. The sealed room was at the very end of the archive, behind a door that no one had mentioned to Lyra. She had found it herself, on her 4th week of sorting, and assumed it was storage. The iron key opened it on the first try. Inside was a single large room with a stone floor and no shelves. In the center of the floor, carved into the stone, was a circle of symbols she did not recognize from her sorting work, older than anything she had cataloged, written in a script that predated the 6 territory system by centuries. In the middle of the circle was a flat stone surface, and on that surface was a single document. She read it 3 times. Then she sat down on the floor and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The document was the original Pact Covenant, not the version she knew, the one that organized wolves by rank, with Alpha at the top and Omega at the bottom, with the king as the supreme authority over all bonded pairs and all territories. That version was 400 years old. This was much older. In the original covenant, the Omega was not the lowest rank. The word did not mean lowest, it meant last, as in the final note that holds a cord together, as in the anchor, as in the one through whom all pact bonds passed and were sustained and kept alive. The Omega was not below the Alpha. The Omega was what made the Alpha possible. Someone had changed this. 400 years ago, when the first Alpha King decided he wanted authority that was total and not shared, someone had gone through every record and every text and revised the language, buried the original covenant, and redefined the word Omega until it meant the opposite of what it had always meant. The binding ritual her mother had performed on her was not old pack magic. It was a suppression technique developed by the same people who had revised the covenant, developed specifically to make sure an Omega carrying the original power could never use it. Lyra sat in the sealed room for a very long time. Then she stood up, walked into the center of the circle, and let the binding go. Kade Dravenmoor came to the archive 3 days later because his territory was falling apart. Not slowly anymore. Quickly, pack bonds snapping like old rope across all 6 territories at once. Wolves who had been bonded for decades, suddenly feeling nothing, rank structures collapsing. His council had no answers. His generals had no answers. Soren had looked at him that morning and said, very quietly, "The answers are in the archive." So he came. He went through the main room and found it empty. He found the door at the far end, open. He went through it. Lyra was standing in the center of the circle on the stone floor. She was not the woman he had laughed at. Or she was exactly that woman, and he was only now seeing all of her. The scars on her throat and shoulder were still there, but they were no longer what he had first thought. Marks of damage, evidence of something broken. They were a map. They were the remains of something that had been locked and was now unlocked, and what was running through her was not power in the way kings understood power. It was something quieter and much larger, something that moved like deep water moves, without announcement, without effort, because it cannot help but move. She looked at him. She did not look afraid. She did not look triumphant. She looked like a woman who has finally been handed back something that was taken from her, and is still deciding what to do with it. He stood in the doorway and said the only thing that was honest. "I need your help." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. "The pack bonds. I know what is happening to them." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I can restore them. All of them, across all 6 territories." He waited. He understood somehow that the rest of the sentence had not arrived yet. "But I need you to understand something first." She held up the document from the stone surface. The original covenant, old and fragile and more powerful than anything in his palace library. This is what an Omega actually is. This is what was changed, and why, and by who. He came forward and took the document and read it. It took a long time. The room was very quiet. When he finished, he looked up at her. She stood there in the center of the circle and watched him process what 400 years of his family's authority was built on. She did not help him with it. This was something he had to do on his own. He set the document down. He was silent for another moment. Then he took one step forward. Not toward the power, not toward the answer to his problem, toward her. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Not what do you want, not what will you accept, what do you need? She looked at him for a long time, long enough to be sure, long enough to measure the distance between the man who had laughed in the great hall and the man standing in front of her now. They were not the same distance apart anymore. "Stand beside me," she said, "not above, beside." He looked at her. He nodded, and the ground beneath the circle began, very quietly, to hum.